Thank you for the introduction. And I'm so grateful for Juris. You laid all the legal foundation, and for Paul, who kind of detailed the religious liberty concerns around these issues. So I want to look at this from another perspective, and that is the rights of the child. So I'm going to start a screen share here. Slowly. So we're going to talk a little bit about children's rights. You in Europe have a somewhat of an advantage over us Americans when talking about this, because all of you are or should be familiar with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This should be part of your national lexicon, especially in Lithuania. You ratified this in 1991, but this spells out, right after a child's right to life, they have a right to be known and loved by both of their biological parents. And so I want to talk with you about the power of this natural right, and then the kind of implications that it should have for family policy. So why are these natural rights so powerful? We're going to talk about three different reasons. The first one is biological identity, that these two adults offer something that no other adults can to children, and it is their biological identity. Second, these two adults happen to be statistically the safest adults in a child's life. And third, when we honor this fundamental child right, it comes with the benefit of offering the perfect gender balance each time. So, biological identity. So biological identity matters to children. And while you may not necessarily understand it, when you are just thinking about your own life, maybe you grew up with both of your parents, so you haven't had a chance to confront the importance of biological reality in your life. We know that biological identity matters to children because we have seen adoptees and donor-conceived children, children conceived through sperm and egg donation, grapple with the loss of their biological and kinship bonds. We've seen adoptees struggling with identity issues. The term genealogical bewilderment was coined back in the 60s, where children wrestle with, like, who am I? Where do I belong? Where did I get these features? Who am I connected to? All these kids are asking the question, who am I and where do I belong? And it's hard to answer those questions outside, or if you've been separated from one or both of your biological parents. Of children surveyed, children who are created through sperm donation, 2/3 agree with the statement, my sperm donor is half of who I am. And in the United States, there has been a drastic shift away from closed adoptions, where there was no contact between the birth family and the adopted child, and towards open adoptions. So now 95% of adoptions in the United States are open or have some degree of contact, because social workers have recognized that children benefit from as many connections with their first family as possible. So this is a quote from one woman who was conceived through sperm donation and raised by loving heterosexual parents. She said, I cannot describe what it feels like. So she went on the search like so many children do who are created through sperm and egg donation. And she searched until she found her donor, which most donor conceived children just consider to be their biological father or their biological mother. She says, I cannot describe what it feels like to see your father's face for the first time. In that moment, I became whole. The lopsided, half-empty feeling I had every day of my life was suddenly filled. I was whole and complete person for the first time in my life. I'm not the same person I was. I am whole. I have my identity. So what she's saying is she did not just need to be safe and loved by the two people who raised her. Her biological parent, her biological donor, had something to offer her that her loving parents could not provide and that she desperately craved. Second, this is a powerful child right because statistically, a child's biological mother and father are the safest adults in a child's life. Child Trends, which is a left-leaning research site, says research clearly demonstrates that family structure matters for children, and that the family structure that helps children the most is a family headed by two biological parents in a low conflict marriage. Children in single parent families, children born to unmarried mothers, children in step families or cohabiting relationships face higher risks of poor outcomes than other children outside of the biological married family. This is one chart drawn from government data that outlines some of the risks to children. Now, by no means are we saying that all stepfathers or stepmothers or boyfriends or girlfriends or partners are abusive or neglectful. But as you can see from the data, that there is one family structure that puts children at the lowest risk. And it is the home where both of their natural rights to both of their parents has been respected and protected. And that's the married biological family that you see down on the bottom left. Then we look at single parents where the risks, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and physical abuse increase. We move on to unmarried biological parents. So even if you are living with both biological parents, but they're cohabiting, you still have increased risks of abuse. Then a child living with neither parent, other married parents. And then finally, at the very end, you see single parent with partner. And the risk of abuse skyrockets. In fact, if you Google the words mother's boyfriend, you will know what I'm talking about. Because an unrelated cohabiting man is statistically the most dangerous person in a child's life. So when we're talking about family structure, any two will not do. Studies show that children with stepfathers, on average, fare about as well as children of single mothers. So it's not a situation where you can swap in or out any adult and have it be unaffected for the child. There's something distinct when it comes to safety and well-being for children that only happens in the home of their married mother and father. In this family conversation, you're probably going to run up against a lot of conversations to the effect of, well, children don't need moms and dads, they just need to be safe and loved. And then you can say, well, congratulations. You just said that children need married mothers and fathers, because statistically, that is the very place where they are most likely to be safe and loved. One woman wrote this. Her father had left the family and then her mother remarried. And this is her story. She says, my mom remarried a couple of years after my bio dad left. The man she married took on 4 kids that were not his own. Unfortunately, he was often verbally abusive, ill-tempered, and reactionary. My mom was put in the position of protecting us almost daily. My stepfather and my mother ended up having 3 children together as well. And I saw my stepfather turn into a loving, adoring, biological father. He was a different, changed man towards his own children. Now, I know some heroic step-parents that are filling in for a missing biological parent, but they are the exception. The rule is that the biological parent is the most connected to, protective of, and invested in children, and there is no statistical case to be made to the contrary. Next, gender balance. The incredible thing about honoring this fundamental child right is that when you do, children will automatically get the paternal love and the maternal love that is optimal for child development. Mothers and fathers are different. Men and women are different. And we see those differences demonstrated most powerfully in the family. And children are the primary beneficiaries of that. Many experts believe that they're so different are the ways that men and women interact with children that there is no such thing as parenting. There's only mothering and fathering, and kids need both. Men don't mother and women don't father. Mothers and fathers parent differently, play differently, communicate differently, discipline differently. They prepare children for life differently. And the incredible thing about having a same-sex and opposite-sex parent in your household is every child has a picture of who they're going to become as an adult. And they also get a picture of the kind of person that they should seek out in a spouse. So the gender balance is critical for child well-being and development. One woman who was raised by two moms talks about the father hunger that often results. So one of the problems of being raised in a same-sex headed household is that even if you have two loving adults caring for the child still longs to be loved by that missing father or that missing mother. And at Them Before Us, we call that mother hunger or father hunger. Children are hungry for it. And 2 moms or 10 moms can never be a father. And it's something that every child longs for. So this is what one woman who was created through sperm donation and raised by 2 women had to say. She said, "My mom's family motto was smile and pretend to be happy. But I didn't feel happy every time I came home from a friend's house and saw how different it was. My best friend's dad was the greatest guy. He was funny and nice and always taking us places. He listened to us. I was jealous of my friend and wrote the word daddy on a piece of paper and I put it under my pillow. I wanted a daddy like my friend had." So we, as a society, have actually experienced father loss and mother loss since time began. We used to lose fathers on a mass scale. For example, after war, women used to routinely die in childbirth, but thanks to modern warfare and modern medicine, those losses are minimal these days. However, now, the reasons that children are losing their mother and father is not because of tragedy, it's because of intentionality. Now, children are losing their mother and father because adult desires are being prioritized above their fundamental rights. And we have 2 different reactions to this, right? When a child loses their parent to tragedy, we encircle the child and we mourn with them. We allow them to remember their parent. We are sad with them. And we all recognize that this is a tragedy. Children these days who are losing their right to their mother or father because an adult desire is being prioritized above their rights, we are telling them this is progress, when the reality is it's an injustice. So let's look at some of the ways that children's rights to their mother and father are being threatened today. The redefinition of marriage is probably the one that is the most prominent in terms of its steady march through the different nations of the world. Adult-centric adoption, the idea that adults should have a right to adopt. Intent-based parenthood laws is now moving full steam ahead in the wake of the redefinition of marriage here in the United States. The normalization of polygamy and polyamory, the widespread acceptance of no-fault divorce that has been, unfortunately, a very steady presence in the United States for decades. Single mothers by choice, that's building on the reproductive technologies. Surrogacy, the normalization of surrogacy and the promotion of surrogacy. Sperm and egg donation. Declining marriage rates are a huge problem, and the cohabitation that goes along with that. The promotion of same-sex parenthood. The idea that 2 moms or 2 dads can be on a birth certificate. So really, every question about marriage and family ultimately come down to the same thing, and that is, are you honoring or are you disregarding the rights of children? So let's look at a few of these issues, the ones that I think are most pressing for Europe today. So what we try to do at Them Before Us is we say, all of these issues about marriage and family, you probably know this as well, tend to be obsessively focused on what adults want. Adult desire drives the narrative in all of these issues and all of these questions. And so we're used to thinking about all of these issues in terms of what the adults want. But the reality is all of them are just different manifestations of disregarding the rights of children. So let's take a look at a few of these issues. First, we're going to look at the us before them, the adults before the children mindset. And then we're going to take a look at what this looks like when we put the children before the adults. And let's take a look at the contrast, because what I hope that you come away with after this presentation is the recognition that if you can honor the rights of children, if you take that children have a right to their mother and father template, you can lay it over the top of any of these marriage and family questions and come out with good policy. So the definition of marriage, the world says the adult-centric version of this, the us before them definition is any 2 consenting adults can be married. But the them before us version of marriage goes like this. Marriage is the only adult relationship that unites the two people to whom children have a natural right. While not every marriage produces children, every child has a mother and father. Traditional marriage is society's best shot at ensuring children are raised by both. And that's why it deserves special recognition and protection. Marriage, historically, has been the most child-friendly institution the world has ever known because of this child-centric focus. When we redefine marriage, we turn it into another vehicle of adult fulfillment. And there's already plenty of those. Same-sex marriage. Okay. Same-sex marriage says love is love, right? There's no difference. Two men can love one another. Two women can love one another. A man and woman can love each other. It doesn't matter. The them before us response to that is redefining marriage redefines parenthood. We already know what happens to parenthood laws when marriage is redefined into a genderless institution. When husbands and wives are optional in marriage, mothers and fathers become optional in parenthood. Marriage laws should reflect children's natural right to be raised by their mother and father. We spend some time in our new book detailing all the different ways that many of the countries that have redefined marriage have then subsequently gone on to weaken the rights of children. And that's how it works. Once you redefine marriage, everywhere that gay marriage goes, the rights of children to their own mother and father are diluted and weakened or completely ignored. And that's an injustice. Sperm and egg donation. What the world says about this is sometimes people need help to get pregnant. I mean, look at these adults. They're struggling. They desire a child. They're infertile. They would be such great parents. This is the way that we can help them. But the children's rights response to that is using the gamete, using the sperm or the egg of a third party is unjust because it intentionally denies children a relationship with their mother or father, regardless of whether the intended parents are single or married or gay or straight. Third-party reproduction violates children's rights. What this does, when we begin with if you look at this from the adult's perspective, usually it's in the context of, we desperately want a child. We want a biological connection to we don't want to adopt, because we want a biological connection to our child. And the only way to do that is to use a sperm donor or an egg donor. And so the couple ends up seeking a sperm donor and having a child that is genetically connected to the mother. But what happens is the child grows up and longs for the connection with their missing biological parent. And so it is simply a transference of longing from parent to child. Surrogacy. So the world says surrogacy is a beautiful way to help a couple to have a baby when they can't have their own. Them before us, the children's rights perspective says, up until birth, the surrogate is the only mother that the child knows. Surrogacy intentionally severs that irreplaceable mother-child bond and inflicts a primal wound on the child. When children lose their birth mother through hardship or tragedy, we grieve. But intentionally inflicting that wound is an injustice. So surrogacy is never a child-friendly process. Even if the child ends up going home with the genetic mother and father, on the day that the child is born, those two genetic parents are just two strangers among 7 billion. It's the surrogate's body the baby knows. It's her heart that she's listened to. It's her voice that she recognizes. It's her body that she longs for. That 9.5 months is actually critical foundations for attachment and trust. And so we should never casually separate that or intentionally separate a child from its birth mother. Adult-centric adoption. The world says, well, we shouldn't discriminate against any adult who wishes to adopt. The children's rights perspective says, no adult has a right to adopt. Children who have lost their parents have a right to be adopted. And social workers must have the freedom to place children in the homes that will best serve those children. That means, because biology matters, and gender matters, and marriage matters, that when you can find a home where the child will have some kind of kinship bond, connection, aunts or uncles or grandparents, so they can retain the connection with their first family, those families should be prioritized. And when the couple is married, that brings the stability that children need, those couples should be prioritized. And homes that can offer the maternal and paternal love that children crave, that is a mother and father, those homes should be prioritized. So we'll talk a little more about adoption versus reproductive technologies and draw this out a little bit more. But the bottom line is, when people say to me, well, do you think that gays and lesbians have a right to adopt? I say no, because no adult has a right to adopt. I'm an adoptive mom. I didn't have a right to that adopted child. I didn't have a right to my adopted child. He had a right to parents. He was the client, not me. So I want to spend some time contrasting adoption and reproductive technologies, because you can and should be a wholehearted supporter of adoption and totally reject children created through third-party reproduction. So first, the first contrast is that adoption mends a wound. A proper understanding of adoption recognizes that adoption begins with loss for the child. As an adoptive mom, I can say, I am seeking to mend that loss and mend that wound of my adopted son, but I will never be able to fully compensate for what he's lost. He has lost something real and precious, and that's something that he may struggle with for the rest of his life. But the adoptive parents are seeking to mend the wound. They didn't create the wound. They didn't decide that they did not determine that the birth mother should be absent from the child's life. Rather, a tragedy or hardship has taken place, and the adoptive parents are coming in to seek to mend the wound. In contrast, sperm and egg donation and surrogacy inflicts the wound. The parents or commissioning parents or adults in those arrangements are choosing for the child to lose a relationship with their mother or father or both. Both of them result in a wound. Both of them originate with a wound, adoption and reproductive technologies. But in the case of adoption, the adults are seeking to mend the wound. With third-party reproduction, the adults are inflicting the wound. Number two, in adoption, the child is the client. I used to work at one of the largest Chinese adoption agencies in the world. And my founder once said to me, Katy, even though the adults are the ones that are paying us, they are not the client. The child is the client. When adoption is working the way it should, every child that needs a home is going to find parents. But not every adult who wants a child is going to get one. And that is why adoption has so many layers of screening and vetting. When we went through our adoption process, we had to have federal background checks, state background checks, references from friends, home studies, training, post-placement supervision, clearances from the country that our son originated in. But that's not how it works in reproductive technologies. In reproductive technologies, the adults are the client. There's no screening, there's no background checks, even though the adults often go home with a child who is unrelated to them, at least to one of their parents. The only check, the only screening, the only check that has to clear, right, is the bank account check. So the adult is the client in reproductive technologies. And the goal of fertility clinics is to get the adult a child no matter the cost. In adoption, the adults support the child. So when children are processing their loss and their wound, which both children who are adopted and children created through sperm and egg donation, they're both going to wonder about their missing parents. They're both going to think about, who are my parents? Why did they choose to not be in relationship with me? So the question is, are the parents going to be able to support their children as they process that loss? In adoption, because the parents did not create the loss, the child is more free to be open that wound and about the healing that needs to take place. They can honestly say, who is my birth family? Or why did they abandon me? And oftentimes in the adoption world, the child has contact with their first family and can get those answers directly from them. In sperm and egg donation, the child is living with the adult who is responsible for their loss. And that means that if they were to voice their questions or discuss their genealogical bewilderment, or say, I'm struggling to figure out who I am, or I want to know who my father is, or why does he not want to be interested? Why did he sell sperm? Why did she choose to sell her eggs? Does she know that I exist? Does she think about me? Do you think that I've passed her on the street already? Which is what many of them are asking themselves, even when they're young. If those kids of sperm and egg donation choose to voice their concerns to their parents, they're talking to the very adult who is responsible for that absent parent. And so what it often means is children created through sperm and egg donation feel that they cannot be honest about the loss and the pain that they experience. So the one study that we have that contrasts children created through adoption, or children who have been adopted and children created through third-party reproduction, shows that even though adoptees are being raised by neither biological parent and children created through sperm and egg donation are related to at least one biological parent, the adoptees fare better than the children created through reproductive technologies. We suggest that that's because they're able to be more open about their pain with their parents because their parents did not inflict the wound, whereas the children created through third-party reproduction often have to suffer alone because talking about their pain means indicting the parents that are raising them. And finally, adoption is sometimes necessary. There are tragic situations where parents are lost or must relinquish their child. We do live in a broken world, and adoption is a just society's response to children in need. Sperm and egg donation and surrogacy is never necessary. It may be very wanted on the part of the parent, but what it does is, whereas adoption seeks to mend the wound, right? It seeks to care for orphans. Sperm and egg donation and surrogacy creates orphans. It creates children. It intentionally decides that they will be motherless or fatherless or both, and it is never necessary. So what happens is when we prioritize children's rights to their mother and father, we get good policy and we make good personal decisions. So the goal of Them Before Us is to seek to make sure that all conversations about marriage and family revolve around children's rights to their mother and father, because if you begin there, you will arrive at the proper policy conclusions every time. So what does effective advocacy look like? Well, first of all, we need to tell the story. We need to flip the script. Right now, the world says that adults are the victims if they don't get what they want in all of these policy debates. Adults are the victims if they are infertile and they can't use a sperm or egg donor. Adults are the victims if they experience same-sex attraction and cannot have the same title of marriage for their relationships. You know, adults are the victims if they are in a struggling marriage and just need an easy out. And if they can't have a no-fault divorce, then they're the ones that have to be in the struggling marriage. I actually did a presentation at a college last night, and I talked about the fallout of divorce and how children suffer emotionally, mentally, physically, academically, even in forming their own relationships as a result of a no-fault divorce. And a girl came up to me afterwards and said, "You're right. I have suffered all the things that you've talked about, but when people think about the divorce, they only give sympathy to my mother and father, but never to me." Children are the real victims in all of the conversations about marriage and family. When we get the answers to these questions wrong, it is children who are the true victims. So when we are talking about these policy discussions, begin with the fact that children are the victims, regardless of how the adults have struggled or suffered, regardless of what they want. If you get these answers wrong, children are going to suffer. So first, we need to highlight the true victims. Second, people in the pro-family world have always had the best research and always had the best statistics. But we have lost. We have continued to lose because the other side tells a better story. So we need to start telling the stories of the true victims. We seek to do that at Them Before Us. On our website, thembeforeus.com, you're going to find a story bank of children created through reproductive technologies, of children who lost a parent to divorce or abandonment, of children who were raised by same-sex parents, talking about really being honest about what their parents who prioritize their own desires above children's rights, what that cost them. Because when you spend some time looking in the faces of these kids, your own heart is changed. So when we advocate for public policy, we first need to lead with the stories of kids and then follow up with the statistics and the research. And finally, we need to be consistent in advocating for the rights of children. We've been ineffective in the past because some pro-family organizations perhaps have gotten defensive when it comes to, oh, children of same-sex parents. Oh, they suffer so greatly. Well, they do. They struggle from mother hunger, father hunger, the loss of a biological parent, often an unstable upbringing. But gays and lesbians are not responsible for the abysmal state of the family in America and around the world today. Heterosexuals are responsible for that, chiefly with the legal redefinition of marriage in no-fault divorce, with the rise of cohabitation, with the normalization of casual sex. And so we have to be very serious about advocating for all children. We need to expect that all adults will conform to the rights of all children rather than being selectively outraged about various issues. So at Them Before Us, we say all adults, single or married or gay or straight, must conform to the rights of children, and there are no exceptions for that. I've just briefly touched on some of this, but the new book that we have coming out next week has all of the stories that really are very difficult to find because they're very expensive to tell. Stories of kids who often have to speak under the guise of anonymity so that they do not upset the family dynamics of their family of origin or of their upbringing. We've gone through all the studies, we have debunked all of the myths. And so if you want more information, this is the resource, this is the place to get it. But I just want to encourage you, I have seen hearts and minds changed by centering the conversation around children's rights to their mother and father in all matters of marriage and family. And I would encourage you to make that the focus point of your work as well. Thank you so much for having me.